So, a YouTuber named Noralities made a video essay about the Isekai genre and her many issues with it. From what I could gather from the video was stuff like fan service, female anime characters, how there aren't enough popular anime for women made by women, a lot of stuff that on paper I don't disagree with. To be fair, I didn't really watch the video from beginning to end, but I have my reasons. This is partially because from the moment I noticed in the description that there was like in a section entirely dedicated to our gripes with ReZero, I beelined just for that to see what she had to say about it, since it is my favorite anime of all time, and I was curious to see what issues she had with it. Safe to say, this entire section is bad. So much so that, well, I wanted to make a video on it. Now, before I get there, though, I want to just, acknowledge that if you were to ask me about the video overall from what I've seen, I find it a bit disagreeable, and I do feel like if I really put my mind to it, I could make a video over the entire thing. However, given a multitude of circumstances, mostly involving my hands being full with finishing my senior year, and really just the fact that I think her section about ReZero is personally the only part that I think is outright terrible, I'm only going to be covering that section. I'll leave the rest to those with more time and energy, but that aside, let me say that I don't have anything against Noralities, and I'm not here to attack her. I'll be critical of her analysis of ReZero and how I think she misrepresented the show for the sake of an argument, but I wish no ill will against her, and, I think that goes without saying, but I think it's worth saying just in case people get the wrong idea. By the way, before we begin, I will be spoiling the shit out of ReZero Season 1 and a little bit of 2, so if you're planning on checking out the series, I wouldn't recommend watching this video unless you're fine with getting spoiled. Anyway, so with that being said, let's get started.
Guys, there's a bomb on the train!
Obama's on the train!
Oh, an isekai with stakes and PTSD and a time travel mechanic that people say is good. That sounds fun. I will sit down and watch that. So I watched it, and guess what? It's a harem, totally not a harem, male power fantasy.
And here we have the first problem. She is just completely incorrect about both of those things. First, let's start with the harem comment, because this one is just blatantly false. Unfortunately for her, she doesn't really elaborate what makes it a harem totally not a harem. I don't know if that means it's trying to hide the fact that it's a harem, or maybe it's a harem, but compared to other harem animes, the general relationship the female characters have with Subaru is different in a way. For someone like me, it leaves a lot to the imagination, but the idea I get is that at the end of the day, ReZero is sort of kind of a harem anime, which, as I've kind of already made clear, is very false. If I wanted to be technical, a harem generally requires about 3 or more love interests to be all over the MC, but ReZero only ever gives Subaru 2 legitimate love interests, and even then I wouldn't say the fact that Subaru has 2 love interests means that the series is a sort of harem. While Subaru is in love with Emilia the entire run of the series, Emilia doesn't feel the same way back until the very end of Season 1. Rem is the one who genuinely loves him, but that only starts at the very end of the second arc and mostly persists throughout the third. It's also worth noting that by the time both characters had a chance to be in love with him at the same time, thus starting our one-man short harem, Rem was thrown into a fucking coma and everybody but Subaru lost their memories of her, thus no harem. Out of all the ones shown in this opening, for example, Felt has no feelings for Subaru and vice versa. At most, I'd say Subaru treats her like a little sister in the sense that he wants to protect her, which, is kind of understandable after he watched her get fucking brutally murdered right in front of him while he couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Otherwise, Felt just sees him as a customer for the most part, since, that's how he introduced himself to her. I also wouldn't say Beatrice has a romantic interest in Subaru either, especially not in Season 1 where their relationship very visibly showcases itself as a friendship that Beatrice begrudgingly accepts. Now, in Season 2, I could see somebody trying to convince me that Beatrice is now romantically into Subaru when, no, this isn't the case. Their relationship here, built off of her wish that Subaru could be that person who was destined to free her of her duty to watch over the library in Roswell's mansion, is not romantic. I'd say at most, it's a change of pace from the begrudged relationship to a, we're really good friends and now we fight together and Subaru will protect me, which isn't inherently romantic. Finally, there's Ram, whose feelings are not directed at Subaru, but instead Roswell, as she dedicates her life to him, and on top of that, she disrespects Subaru as often as she can and helps him mostly for her own gain. And that's not even going into all the other female characters like the royal candidates, who I'd say simply respect Subaru after his bravery shown in Arc 3, or Echidna in Season 2, who, as far as we see in Season 2, is just using him to get knowledge on his ability returned by death. Look, I just can't buy the idea that this is a harem, not a harem. If Subaru has no harem to begin with, he has friends. What, does having friends mean you can have a harem now? Hey Key, good news, you got your wish. You got a harem now. Oh no, Kanzaki isn't in it, but if it makes you feel any better, I am. Anyways, let's move on to the somehow even more egregious take, that being it's a male power fantasy. A male power fantasy is the idea that a story makes the main character somebody that the male viewer wants to be, a cool guy who gets all the girls and is a badass, characters like Kirito for an example. But this is just plain wrong. ReZero's Subaru is akin to a mirror, at least to the audience members who have a lot of those desires to be popular, loved, and strong, because Subaru isn't any of that. He's weak and, quite frankly, immature in many instances, not helped by the fact that he always finds himself getting horribly murdered. As far as I know, none of those are a part of the male power fantasy.
The reset mechanic creeps into murder porn. Like, it's gratuitous.
I don't know if it's just me, but I don't really like how you kind of just write it off as being gratuitous, because, you know, gratuitous means shit like lacking good reason or unwarranted, like it's just there for the sake of it. When honestly, it really does help put into perspective, like, just how fucked the world of ReZero is and how, like, just horrifying it is to just get killed and have to come back and, like, possibly relive that and shit like that. I can understand, you know, not liking it as somebody who kind of had to look away a few times because, you know, gore is not my thing. Even if the series does censor it, it's, you know, hard to watch sometimes. But again, I don't like how you just kind of write it off like that.
Guys, there's a bomb on the train!
Obama's on the train!
So the thing about ReZero is that it's supposed to be a subversive response to the popular wish fulfillment anime like Sword Art Online by showing how horrible and gritty that kind of experience would actually be in real life. How unprepared and outclassed you would be at every turn from suddenly being thrust into a world where you don't know any of the history or logic or anything about it. But then they also kept and included all of the same generic fantasy nonsense without adding anything more substantial.
For an example? Oh no, it has Neckos. The series doesn't do anything new with the fantasy genre that we haven't seen another Isekai. Time to pack up. Honestly, this feels like a result of you having only seen the first season, which only really dips its toes into the world and lore of ReZero, something it started to do in the last arc of Season 1, did a bit more of in Season 2, and is currently doing a lot of that in the light novels at the moment from what I've heard. And it makes sense that it's more, you know, basic right from the get-go. It's a way for the audience to slowly be eased into the world. That's kind of what a lot of stories do, but writing ReZero off here because it doesn't seem to do it in the first season is honestly really stupid.
Guys, there's a bomb on the train!
Obama's on the train!
And before you start, yes, I know Subaru has PTSD. Yes, I know Subaru is supposed to be a flawed character and that this is his low point. Yes, I know that this is clearly not framed as a good thing and we, the audience, are not supposed to be on Subaru's side right now. But from Amelia's perspective, Subaru has just admitted to being a quote-unquote nice guy. He's yelled at Amelia about how much he's sacrificed for her sake because he's in love with her, and that because of that she owes him something. I mean, he's put the work in. He deserves some reward, right? Like, she's a character in a dating sim and he's maxed out her heart meter or something, so of course by now she should be in love with him, because that's how that works, right? And I know that that's the point that the scene is trying to make, but it's also a really hard pill for me to swallow when I'm still supposed to be invested in Subaru's growth.
I can understand it's a scene that a lot of people don't like because, well, he's kind of a terrible person here. But the point is, from that point in the series, he's supposed to grow from that immature, childish idea he has here, which is something he does by the end of it.
Guys, there's a bomb on the train!
Obama's on the train!
I'm really not sure if I can accurately explain why this scene is so insulting to me. How obvious it is that this is a male fantasy. It is a man exposing the worst parts of himself to a woman, and then her unconditional love is the thing that saves him. Maybe if media could exist in a void, I wouldn't be so bothered by it. But as is, Subaru has just yelled at this girl for 10 minutes, and then she's had to do all the emotional labor to put him back together after his breakdown. And again, that would be fine in concept if we didn't have things like otaku culture and the isekai genre being made as a male power fantasy where a guy is surrounded by beautiful women who love them unconditionally.
Honestly, I really feel like you're acting incapable of looking at this scene with anything more than a "this is what you'd see in a male fantasy isekai story" attitude, because you're not looking at all of the context as to why Rem accepts Subaru despite all of his flaws and ends up treating him the way she does. Rem fires back against Subaru's long speech about how terrible he is because, well, even she knows Subaru may be flawed. That same Subaru was also the same person who, despite the fact that she wanted him dead, accepted her and reached out to save her. And not only that, but he also helped her with her own insecurities and inferiority complex. Rem's love for Subaru and why she made that big speech to him has much more nuance than you let on, which you ignore in favor of just treating Rem like she's just another anime waifu that just loves Subaru because that's just what men want.
Guys, there's a bomb on the train!
Obama's on the train!
Subaru keeps yelling at the women in his life who have done nothing but support him. But because he's too wrapped up in his own self-interest, he can't genuinely empathize or care for them.
You mean he couldn't? Because that was a problem he had. A problem the series made clear he had and needed to improve on, and from that moment with Rem, it's something he does work on. He works on bettering those aspects of himself and pushing him to be better than he was at that moment. I can understand if you just want to present Subaru in that moment, but presenting Subaru as a whole, as that guy as he was in that moment where he was in his worst, is terribly disingenuous on your end. Like, seriously, I don't want to write off the rest of your video, especially since it tackles things that, from what I've seen, I honestly sort of agree with, even if, some of the arguments and logic you have are stuff I kind of disagree with, but it's because of this section that I honestly very much got soured off on giving a shit about the rest of that video, because if you can't even look at ReZero without misinterpreting it, then I honestly have little interest in sitting through the rest of the video. I understand that this may be because I'm biased, because again, ReZero is my favorite anime of all time, but it really just bothers me how much it really feels like you push this idea that ReZero is another victim of these flaws in anime when it's not really how you describe it. At the end of the day, though, this is all I wanted to say about your video. I don't like this part, plain and simple. And while I don't want to try and force my opinion of ReZero down your throat, I asked that you do not misrepresent its story to make a point. That's all. I'm just gonna go and just fucking go to bed like I should have when I first saw this video. Good night, folks. Hope you all have a good one.